Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys. If you are new here, my name is John Wagler, and I'm part of the team, and just so thankful that you chose to be here with us this morning. As Lacey said earlier, we spend a lot of time and really deeply care about the environment here, and that we really want to create a safe place for people to explore their faith in Jesus and what that looks like, and a place where you can discover purpose, be known in community, and then go out and make a difference. And so that's what we want to do here. That's our greatest hope for everybody here. So thank you so much for being here today. Normally what we do before we get into the message is I tell a little story about generosity. And the reason why I tell stories about generosity is because you need to know that every time you're generous, that you're a part of other people's stories. And that's so important. And so I was thinking how 2 weeks ago, I was meeting with one of the girls that we support down in the Tidewater area who works with college students, and she was just sharing some stories about what's happening there. And here's what was just really cool as I was just kind of processing it. Because when you guys give, we're able to do more stuff like that and support people. But, if you guys remember your college years, or if you're on your way to your college years, it's a pretty pivotal time in your life, and a time where, you're sensitive to a lot of things and developing a lot of things. But here she's sharing stories about students coming to know Jesus that never have before, and that those students that maybe already did know Jesus, like just what's being cultivated in them in leadership and depth of knowledge is just so cool. And so you guys are a part of that story. And so it's awesome. So thank you so much for your generosity. The other thing, too, is, and I am hearing that ringing again, just so the other thing, too, is coming up November 18th, all right? So I just want to get this on your calendars. We do something called the share offering. And what we do is we ask everyone to give kind of above and beyond what they normally do, and we ask you to give 1 day's wage. And so what we tell you a couple of months ahead of time so you can prep for it. But we ask you to give 1 day's wage. Then we take up that offering, and we give every single cent away to our partners. Last year, we gave away almost $90,000. And so this will be the 5th time that we've done it. I'll tally it up, and I'll tell you guys next week. But it's a lot of money we've been able to give away through this on top of what we already give away normally. My hope is this year I have like a mental number in my head, and it's 150. Okay, so that's what I'm praying for. And so, but it's not up to me. I can't do that. So, but that's like a number I think that we can come together, and I think we can get there. And so it's 1 day's wage. So we'll help you guys kind of think that through. If you make $30,000, what's that 1 day's wage kind of deal? And we'll put that up there. But just wanted to put that on your radar so that when we get like a week out and we're like, hey, the share offering's next week, you're not like, what? So now you know. Now you have no excuse. So that's coming, November 18th. All right. Do you guys remember having pop quizzes in school? Did everyone like them? Cool. Well, you're going to have one right now. So here's what I want you to do. If you take notes, like on paper, like just get your pen and paper out. If you take notes on your phone, you can get your phone out. If you don't take notes, here's your conviction, you should. So get your phone out as well, because here's what I want you guys to do. We're going to take a quiz, and I really mean this. It's going to be 11 questions, and you're going to answer A, B, or C to all of them. All right? This is not a Bible quiz either. So we're just going to see how smart you guys are. We ready? All right. Question number 1, and don't cheat either. Like, don't look at the person next to you, and you just got to be honest when I ask you what you did. All right, question number 1. In the last 25 years, crime in the U.S. has A, decreased by 50 to 75%, B, decreased by 25 to 40%, C, basically remained the same. Question number 2. Listen, y'all, you better keep up, all right? This is not, I have a certain time to get this done. At the current rate, the women's salaries will be equal to men's in the year 2031, 2059, 2075. All right? Number 3, what percentage of married couples are still on their first marriage? A, 38%, B, 52%, C, 76%. Question number 4, in all low-income countries across the world today, how many girls finish primary school? A, 20%, B, 40%, C, 60%. Number 5, where does the majority of the world population live? Low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries. Number 6, In the last 20 years, the proportion of world population living in extreme poverty has A, almost doubled, B, remained more or less the same, C, almost halved. Question number 7, what is the life expectancy in the world today? 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. Question number 8, how did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? A, more than doubled, B, remained the same, C, decreased to less than half. Number 9, how many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? 20%, 50%, 80%. Number 10, worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? A, 9, B, 6, C, 3. The last one, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, plane crashes, nuclear leaks, and murders make up what percentage of total deaths per year? A, less than 1%, B, 6%, C, 11%. All right, you ready? Number 1, in the last 24 years, crime in the U.S. has A, decreased by 50 to 75%. Number 2, at the current rate, women's salaries will be equal to men's in B, 2059. Number 3, what percentage of married couples are still in their first marriage? C, 76%. Number 4, in all low-income countries across the world today, how many girls finish primary school? C, 60%. Where does the majority of the world population live? B, middle-income countries. In the last 20 years, the proportion of world population living in extreme poverty has C, almost halved. What is the life expectancy in the world today? C, 70 years. How did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? C, decreased to less than half. Number 8, how many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated? C, 80%. Worldwide, how many years have women of the same age spent in school? A, 9 years. And the last one, natural disasters, how many deaths? Less than 1%. All right. How many guys got less than 5? Be honest, don't lie, you're in church. Look around you. Why did we just take that quiz? Because I want you guys to see and know that you're not as smart as you think you are, and that your perspective on this world and on your life is not as good as you think it is. It's important to know that. And the reason is because we need a healthy perspective. See, what you guys probably saw is you probably thought a little more negative, is my guess. You thought, and if you were walking in here today and we kind of interviewed you coming in saying like, hey, do you feel like you have a good perspective on the world? You'd be like, yes. Of course I do. I'm well-read. I study everything really well, right? But what we quickly begin to see in something like that is almost everyone in here failed. Like, if we were grading, you failed, right? And so what does that mean for us? Well, that means that we've got to understand that our perspective is just off in life. Because here's when it comes to how we believe things, which obviously shapes our perspective. We think this is how we do it. We hear an idea, we see who it's coming from, we vet the idea and study it, determine its validity, and then we choose whether or not to believe it. That's how we think we do it. But the reality is what we do is we hear an idea, we determine, all right, do I know this person that it's coming from, and then we just believe it or not. Like, we don't vet it, we don't study it, we don't determine its validity, we don't read the other possible options that are out there. We don't study as much the other side as the side that you already agree with, right? And so what that does in us is it creates a lot of things. It creates binary thinking, it creates division, it creates a lack of empathy for people that disagree with you. It creates this mindset that we already know what we know and we are right. You see, here's what is also true for 100% of the 1,000+ people that have come into this building today, and that is we all have bias. All of us do. And so when it comes to a breakthrough, if we're operating within the context of our bias, we'll never have one because we just get stuck there. And so we dig our heels in. Now, can you imagine if I came up on stage and I just started putting like political things up there? I'm like, who voted for Trump? Who voted for Hillary? And it wouldn't matter because guess what? Even like with the stuff that happened with the Supreme Court this week, you already dug your heels in long before anything was out. Why? Because we know what we know. We like what we know, and we all have bias. And here's what we do. And the reason, you know why I know that to be true? Because I see what you guys post. I see what you guys like. And like, you just post things you already agree with, you know? And so and you like things that you've kind of just fit you affirm your own opinions anyway. We all do those things. Like, no one's above that. But it requires, to really have perspective and a healthy one. It requires a lot of work, but we don't like to do that. You know how you get that little pop-up in the top right-hand corner of your screen that you have an update your computer? What do you always do? Later, right? Like, it's just later. And our brains don't automatically update. We need to do the work to have a breakthrough in our perspective, do work to learn more and grow more and see from someone else's perspective to truly be healthy. I was looking at how they do these brain scans with, you guys are probably getting sick when I talk about our brains, but you're going to have to get over it because I like it. So they're doing these brain scans about how when people are thinking within their bias, so when they're just talking about what they know, so they do it on like people are debating and they put these brain scans on and everything else. When you operate within your bias, your IQ and EQ decrease. So you're technically not as smart and you are more unhealthy emotionally when you're just operating in your bias. But when they would do the brain scans on people where they were engaging and asking questions of the other person's perspective, their IQ and EQ levels went up. All right, so here's what this means. We need, if we really want to break through in our lives, we need to engage healthy perspective. We need to ask questions. We need to care about other things in our life besides what we think we already know. And we're going to look at a story here in just a second that kind of points into that. But I wrote this down this week, and this is kind of the main line for today. It's the health of our perspective is determined by the quality of our curiosity. The health of our perspective is determined by the quality of our curiosity. If you're not familiar with the Bible, Jesus would tell these stories. They were called parables. And in these parables, he would just use these illustrations and to tell a larger meaning in life. And so he would tell, that's basically how he taught almost the whole time. And quite often, the start of his parables would say something like this: "For the kingdom of God is like," or "the kingdom of heaven is like." And if you want a really great practical exercise to do to kind of learn more about what Jesus taught, about how we should think about kingdom and everything else, go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 Gospels that detail out all the teachings of Jesus, and write down, anytime you see the kingdom of heaven is like, or the kingdom of God is like, and write down the characteristic that Jesus describes in his teaching. Because what you'll quickly see, and this is for everybody, what you'll quickly see is you're going to be like, oh man, in this area of my life, I'm building more of the kingdom of man than I am the kingdom of God. And what it does is it'll help kind of reshape our perspective and how we should actually view life. And so there's this one in Matthew chapter 20, and that's where we're going to be today, where Jesus begins to speak to his disciples, and he tells this parable of this vineyard workers and the landowner. And so in Matthew chapter 20, he says this: "For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard, and at noon and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. He asked them, 'Why haven't you been working today?' And they replied, 'Because no one has hired us.' So the landowner told them, 'Then go out and join the others in my vineyard.' That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to their pay, they assumed they would receive more. But they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner, 'Those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you've paid them just as much as you paid us, who worked all day in the scorching heat.' He answered one of them, 'Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money?' should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last. And so when Jesus is writing this story, there are a bunch of different elements to it. And part of it, he's trying to help them shape and get some perspective on what it means to be involved in the kingdom of heaven. How do you get in, and kind of what's the landowner's role, meaning God's role in all of this. He's also trying to change their perspective and how they just think about life and people in general. And I think it's important for us to look at the story. And I looked at kind of three main things within the context of this one that I think point to what really would help shape and what Jesus was pointing to help reshape their perspective that holds true for us too when we're thinking about our own life. And the first thing is this, is generosity. You know, the landowner is incredibly generous. And their response, and you kind of get what they're saying, don't you? When he's like, hold on a second, we worked a full day. They only worked about an hour. Like, why are they getting the same amount of pay? And it feels like there's some injustice happening there, and it feels like things should be equal and all that stuff. But what he's trying to get them to understand is like, no. This is about a heart of generosity towards people. This is about what it really means to cultivate that heart. See, because here's the thing. If generosity is lacking in our life, okay, if there's a hole of that in the core of our very being, then here's what this means. We've replaced it with something. And what we've replaced that generosity would be with something that's opposite of that. So that's probably selfishness, greed, power, control, whatever. Like it's going to be opposite of having a generous heart. And so we can't, it isn't just like, oh, it's just, hey, generosity should be there in my heart, but it's just not there and there's just nothing there, so I'm good. It's no. Where generosity should be, like we'll put something in it if generosity isn't there. And then at the end, it's like we know selfishness isn't good for us, and pride isn't good for us, and greed isn't good for us, and all that stuff, but we will put it in there. And so if I were to poll everybody coming in and I asked you if you were generous, I highly doubt anyone would be like, no, I'm really greedy and selfish and prideful, right? But here's the thing. If I was like, hey, who's generous in here? And everyone raised their hand, and my next comment was, all right, here's what else we're going to do. Next week, everyone bring in their bank statements, and you're going to prove it. My guess there would be this collective gasp, and you being like, man, that really turned quickly on me. And the thing is, we should be able to prove our generosity. Now, generosity is about more than money, and I'll get to that in a second. But it is something like we should be able to prove our generosity. And we know this too, that generosity is at the core of truly loving someone else. If you have ever been in love, or you want to be in love, or you're currently in love, whatever, no one sits here and says this, you know what, I really hope he's a selfish lover. I hope she's really greedy. I hope she's controlling and just really concerned about dominating and power. We know inherently that that's not the way love works, and that's not what we desire. We know that love operates best in our generosity. And so then why do we become desensitized? Why do we not even think about our generosity with our money or with our time or with our words or with our talents or whatever it is? That at the core of our very being, and what Jesus is pointing these guys to is you need to have, if you want to have a true breakthrough in your life, if you really want to have healthy perspective, then you've got to be generous towards people around you. But it requires us to ask questions. It requires us to know stories. It requires us to get involved. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes sacrifice to do so. But if we want to love properly, that's what we got to do. You see, at the heart of the message of the gospel of Jesus is of how much he loved us. And that what ends up happening is a response to that love, we love others. But we can't love others without being generous. It is impossible. And we know that. And so it's important for us to begin to wrestle with those areas in our life and saying okay, am I really generous here with all that I am? Do I have that heart kind of cultivating inside of me? The second thing I think we can pull from this is this idea of positivity. Let's be honest. It's very negative in our world today, right? When you come across someone that's super encouraging and hopeful and positive, it's almost like you just discovered a unicorn. You're just oh my gosh, Who are you? Why are you that way? And so the negativity is the default position seemingly in our culture right now. But man, when you're around encouraging and hopeful people, it's like, man, it does something to your soul, doesn't it? It does something to your soul. And that's why I wanted you guys to see, like even in that little quiz that we did, that the reality is we lean negative in our answers. We just inherently do. Why? Because of our perspective. Because of our bias, because of the things that kind of are at play in our brains. And so it's important for us, again, to ask questions, to stay curious. Did you notice in verse 12, their response to when everyone else got paid, their response was to make a statement. They didn't ask a question. In verse 12, he says, those people worked only 1 hour and you paid them just as much as you paid us who worked all day in the scorching heat. What would have changed if he had said this? Hey, I'm just curious. Like, we were working really hard today. Where are you coming from that you decided to pay them the same amount that you paid us? That's a whole different perspective. That's a whole different way to approach things. Too often, we make statements and don't care about the questions. Too often, we're just saying, I'm going to dig my heels in and where I am, and we don't even consider for a second to find out why someone else might come from their perspective, why someone else's story. When you actually start getting close to people, when you hear their stories, even when you disagree and you start hearing why they come from that perspective, it doesn't mean you're going to automatically agree. But what you do in those moments is you create a heart and an attachment to them. Why? Because you're generous with your feelings and your emotions and your love. You're curious about their perspective. You have a positive view on who they are as a person. And so that shifts everything. And your ability to love others begins to drastically change. But we go negative first, and that's pretty common. I remember a news story several years ago where they took the 10 Commandments off the wall in one of the schools, and there were a bunch of Christians on the news just freaking out. And I just remember just sitting there laughing because they took the 10 Commandments off the walls. What are we gonna do? It's the school's going to hell. Everything's just so negative. And I'm just sitting there thinking or another perspective and a positive one would be we could live it out. Doesn't really need to be on the wall. We just live it out. Oh my gosh, they've taken prayer out of the schools. They can't. You cannot stop me from praying. You can't do it. And so it's do we just go negative all the time? Or is there a positive way to view things? If you're a conservative in this room, do you always think the more liberal side of things are just so, man, they're the worst and they're just ruining everything? If you're on the more liberal side in this room, do you always think the conservatives are ruining everything? There's so much good on both sides. But the problem is we don't choose to engage it. We'll dig in. It's you don't want government health care for everyone? Oh my gosh, you must hate people. Or maybe there's another perspective on things. Wherever, listen, 80% of things people get treated for could go away just through diet and exercise. So there's just different perspectives on things, right? Rather than just kind of digging in and thinking we know everything, if we really want to engage and love people like we should, our posture is, I'm curious. I'm curious why you're saying that. I'm curious why you think that way. I'm curious why you've arrived to that opinion or why you believe that way. It changes our perspective and has a healthier view. Again, it doesn't mean that you're going to automatically agree with them, but what it does mean is you care enough about them to truly love them and engage them like we should, like Jesus taught us to. The negative thoughts that come into our brains, how many of you guys focus on negative things? Be honest, it's okay. We're not going to, we all do to some degree, right? If I'm hey, is there a person in your life you're really negative about a lot? Everyone can probably picture somebody, right? If they're next to you, just don't look at them. But but you can picture somebody you think negatively of, do you know after 3 weeks of negative thoughts on someone or something, you technically create a toxic neural pathway in your brain. All right, after 3 weeks. At 6 weeks, you scientifically have neurological trauma in your brain, just from negative thoughts. And so when we aren't interested in engaging the other side, when we aren't interested in looking at what's positive and finding what is good, we are training our brains a certain way. And so it's hard work. It takes time, it takes effort, and we create bad habits. We all do it. It's hard. And for some, it's harder than others, and that's the reality. But it's worth the effort to see what's good, to see what's positive, to see what's hopeful. See, what negativity does when it comes to people is you will inherently demonize or dehumanize people, won't you? Anyone you disagree, that's what you'll do. When you're negative about a grouping of people, that's what you do. And listen, if we admit it, if we're honest, you take a little pleasure in their pain, don't you? Or you want them to have a little pain. That's what happens. That's what's going on inside. Well, and think about every human atrocity that's ever happened because we dehumanize and demonize a grouping of people. And that comes from a negativity. That comes from a really unhealthy perspective on who folks are. I actually missed this on the first one, so I'm going to go back to it. But generosity asks this question: how can I use what I have for others? And here's what positivity does. Positivity asks this question: where do I see the good in this? Where do I see the good in this? You see, here's what happens with negativity. Negativity builds up. As negativity builds up, so does our lack of civility and lack of awareness. And that's what we see everywhere. That's what we see everywhere. And here's what else ends up happening at that point. Negativity breeds fear and then fuels our distorted thinking. It'll fuel distorted thinking. This is one of the reasons that the command we hear most in the Bible when you read through it is to fear not. Because when negativity is built up, you're lacking trust in God. When negativity and fear continues to build up, it becomes detrimental to how we just love other people and everything, right? And so it's just kind of being aware of these things and allowing to kind of this, all right, what's positive here? And you might be thinking right now, yeah, but man, I struggle with fear and I struggle with different things and it's been hard my whole life, and I'm not belittling that at all. I know it can be very difficult for folks. Or maybe you've gone through something really traumatic and you're like, there was no good in that at all. I think in every situation, there is some good. It doesn't mean the situation was good. It didn't mean God wanted that for you. It's just even in something that's horrible, if we want to, we can see at least a glimmer of good somewhere. And the question is, are we going to hold on to the good or to the bad? The positive or the negative? Sometimes, our positive is just being thankful for what didn't happen. It was still really bad, but maybe just being positive for what didn't happen. I know that's not all times, but maybe sometimes that is. It's a different kind of framework on how to think through things. But do you lean positive or do you lean negative in life? Here's the last thing: grace. Last thing is grace. So we see generosity, we see positivity, we see grace. Grace is so hard. Do you know why grace is hard? Because you're giving something to someone that doesn't deserve it. Here's the thing, though. That's exactly what Jesus has done for us. Giving us something that we did not deserve. Doing something for us that we did not deserve. But because of his generous love, because of his positive look on us, because of his gracious heart, we experience what we can experience through him. But being gracious towards someone is hard. It's hard, but that has to be at the core if you call yourself a believer. And when we're biased and when we are negative and when we are selfish and power hungry and prideful and greedy, you can't be gracious to people. And you might be thinking oh, are you just saying to let anything go and that's what grace is? No. Sometimes grace is telling people, calling things out. Sometimes grace, the gracious thing to do is set up boundaries and discipline. That's sometimes the gracious thing to do. But having a gracious heart and a generous heart and a positive heart, like as you begin to engage people, you start learning to have some wisdom. All right, what is this here? Am I just kind of bringing them in and bear hugging them and being like, hey, we'll get through this? Or is this the time where I'm like, you need to stop? Right? And so those are two kind of different things, but both those things can be very gracious. Here's what grace does. Grace asks this question: how does my response show that love is my greatest concern? How does my response show that love is my greatest concern? Here's what isn't gracious: gossip. Gossip's not gracious. Lying's not gracious. Slander's not gracious. Bias is not gracious. Judgment and condemnation, not gracious. Here's what isn't gracious to ourselves: shame. Self-condemnation. It's not gracious to ourselves. When we're not gracious to ourselves and beat ourselves up over and over and over and over and over again, we begin to take on an identity that Jesus never intended us to have. So it's not even gracious to do that to ourselves. It's not gracious to be aware of other people's faults more than your own. It's not gracious to getting mad at someone who could receive God's favor at the last second. And I know this one's hard, so I'll tell you this story. I have a friend who's a missionary in the Middle East, and he's really close to someone who was around Osama bin Laden and his crew. Now, what I'm about to say, I'm not saying it's true. I'm just telling you the story that I heard, okay? So he tells me the story of when he got killed, how his friend was sad. And his friend was sad because he felt like Osama bin Laden was just on the cusp of maybe believing in Jesus, that he was having this big, major faith crisis. And now he was holding out hope that maybe something happened at the last second. So I'm hearing him say this, and I'm sitting there being like, hell no. That's stupid. And he was like, look at me, he goes, wait, what did you say? I was like, there's no way that happened. There's no way. He deserves what he got. And he looked at me dead in the eye and he goes, why wouldn't you want that to be true? And I was like, no. But what it revealed in my heart, because that was a heart thing, it wasn't a head thing. That was like a true heart thing in that moment for me. It was like I was trying to be judge and jury of people's salvations and where they go. That there was clearly still some room of growth to be there in terms of how I view and love other people and my grace towards them. Is it easy? Nope. But here's the thing. There's never been a more generous love for you or for me than what we received from Jesus. There's never been a more positive outlook on who you are than who Jesus sees us as a son and a daughter. There's never been a more gracious act for someone to die and to rise again, to not only show the power over sin and victory, but so we could be forgiven and someday experience life with him. But then we've got to choose, don't we? We choose generosity or not. We choose positivity or not. We choose graciousness or not. And so what I want to do to just kind of close this today is we're just going to spend a minute, and it's just going to be quiet. And so it might feel a little awkward, that's okay. But we're going to just be quiet, and we're going to have a little time of confession. Because I want us to take this in, because again, this is man, if we really want to break through, we got to do something with this, right? Not just in theory. And so I want to have a time of confession of all right, where am I really not generous? Where am I really not positive, or maybe who I'm not positive towards? Where am I really not gracious, or who am I not gracious towards? And some of this, honestly, for some of you guys, it might be towards yourself. Don't leave yourself out of this. So it's going to be quiet here. I want you to close your eyes and bow your heads and just have a time of confession here together. God, the beauty of times of prayer, times of confession is you hear it and you know it. And so whatever everyone in here was just confessing here today, God, I pray that we won't just confess it with our mouths, but we'll believe it in our hearts, that we will actively ask for forgiveness and want to repent or turn away from that kind of thinking and behavior. That we would truly desire the kind of heart that you have for us. We would truly desire the kind of heart that is generous, that is positive and encouraging and hopeful, that is gracious and kind. Because that's what you've modeled for us. And we all have work to do. We all have areas that need to be transformed by you. And I just pray that we'll be open to that so that we can truly experience a breakthrough, that we won't just talk about it, that we'll actively pursue it and do something about it and engage it like you want us to. But God, it starts with us just saying a yes to you and wanting to live that kind of life and follow you and believe in the transformation that you can bring. And so, God, I pray that we will engage it in that way so that when people look at us and are around us, they just know that there's something different, that we've had some kind of breakthrough in our hearts. Our words would be different. Our perspective is different. Our engagement with people in this world is different. Whether things are good or bad or indifferent. And so, God, I'm just thankful that you want to see freedom in us. You want us to be hopeful. And you want us to experience your kingdom here on this earth. And so we just love you and thank you. In your name we pray, everybody said. Amen. 2 things before you guys leave today. If you did say yes to Jesus today, please stop by the What's Next area on your way out. There are people there to just talk with you and help you with some next steps. Or if you want to get connected, you can do the same. The second thing is tonight, 7 o'clock. We're having a worship night here, and it is very different than a Sunday morning service and everything. And it's just going to be a powerful night. And I promise you this, listen, I love football, but it's better than football. All right, and so it'll just be a great night of being here together. Kids are welcome, obviously, and we do have childcare if they're younger. But it'd be a great night to just come back and just start your week off the right way. You guys have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you next week.